Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship that drains your soul, leaving you questioning your own sanity? Welcome to Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser, the podcast that shines a light on the dark tactics of abusers and empowers survivors to reclaim their lives. I'm Vanessa Reiser, licensed therapist, author, advocate, and fellow warrior on the path to healing from narcissistic and cult abuse. Joining me for many upcoming episodes is my co-host Dave. We'll unpack each conversation together, diving deeper into narcissistic abuse, cult dynamics, politics, pop culture, and what it all means for real-life healing. Today, we'll hear harrowing stories from survivors, explore the psychology behind these toxic relationships, and share insights and tools to spot red flags, break free, and begin profound healing. This show is for mature audiences and may include upsetting topics like violence. For full content warnings, sources, and resources, check the episode notes. Guest opinions are their own and don't necessarily reflect mine or any affiliated platforms. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy, legal, or medical advice. Today's episode is going to be profoundly insightful and validating for anyone navigating the complexities of narcissistic abuse, coercive control, relational trauma, and the intersection of psychology with the legal system. I'm truly honored to welcome a leading expert in this space, Dr. Catherine Barrett of CB Psychological Incorporated. Dr. Catherine Barrett, often known as Dr. Cathy Barrett, is a licensed clinical forensic psychologist based in Los Angeles, California. With over 16 years of clinical mental health experience and more than 12 years in forensic psychology, she specializes in narcissistic abuse recovery, coercive control, complex PTSD, CPTSD, intimate partner violence, relational trauma, and the devastating impact of narcissistic dynamics on individuals, families, and court-involved cases. She has a doctorate in psychology and a marriage and family therapist background, and her practice through CB Psychological Incorporated includes individual and family psychotherapy, as well as forensic evaluations, expert witness testimony in family court matters, such as custody disputes involving alleged alienation, emotional abuse, and coercive control, and court-ordered evaluation reviews. Dr. Barrett has served as an expert witness in numerous high-stakes cases, helping judges understand the subtle mechanisms of narcissistic abuse and its effects on family systems. In addition to her private practice in Calabasas, she serves as part-time or associate faculty at Mialum USC Rossier School of Education at the University of Southern California, where she teaches courses on law and ethics, child elder abuse and domestic violence, clinical assessment, and supervises fieldwork. Her teaching and clinical work draw from deep training in treating survivors of intimate partner violence, including early experience at the Los Angeles LGBT Center, severe personality disorders with a focus on narcissism, addiction recovery, and marginalized communities. Dr. Barrett is a sought-after speaker and educator, offering continuing education courses and trainings on topics like the relational impact of narcissism, how narcissistic personalities affect family dynamics, working with children in abusive systems, and ethical considerations in diagnosing or addressing narcissism in absent individuals. Her work bridges clinical healing with forensic advocacy, empowering survivors to reclaim their narratives while pushing for better understanding in legal and therapeutic settings. Dr. Barrett, thank you for bringing your expertise, compassion, and fierce commitment to this conversation. Your insights into the mechanics of narcissistic abuse, from the therapy room to the courtroom, are exactly what so many survivors need to hear right now. I'm grateful you're here. Listeners, prepare for a deep, evidence-informed, and survivor-centered discussion that cuts through the confusion and offers real tools for understanding and healing. It's so nice for you to be here today. I'm so excited to have you. Welcome,
Thank you so
welcome.
much for having me.
I'm so happy to have you. We are going to have a great time today because I know that we love to get into it. I want to ask you just a few questions before we start into like, the state of the world, etc. I'm very curious, how did you originally start getting into this work and dealing with the work that you're doing now with your business, with your practice, with teaching? How did you get into all of this?
It's quite a trajectory. It's random and it's not all at once. So I'll give you like the Cliffs notes because it's kind of long. But I towards the end of my bachelor's degree, I started to work at a women's shelter, and that's when I first like was exposed to working with survivors of domestic violence, and that really spoke to me. And so I ended up going to USC for my master's in marriage and family therapy, kind of already knowing that I wanted to go into the legal field, but I wanted to have like a strong foundation in clinical work, which is like I'm so glad that I did that. So I did my master's there in marriage and family therapy. And at that time, I did my training at the LGBT Center and with a substance abuse recovery center called the Claire Foundation in Santa Monica. And at that time, I was exposed. We were like, it was during Prop 8 back in 2008 when we were looking for like marriage equality. And so we started to do these independent, sort of anonymous studies at different prides to see like how many people within the queer community were actually being abused in their relationships. Because if you admitted at that time, here we are fighting for our rights. It's one more thing they can hold against us if we're speaking about it openly. And that's when I really realized like this work is super important to me. I had a wonderful clinical director there by the name of Susan Holt, who was like, listen, you never want to work with couples like first you want to meet with them separately, have conversations with them, never just start working with a couple. So it really started to like open up my mind and my heart to this work. And then when I moved into my doctorate in forensic psych, I moved more into like what we would call the belly of the beast, which I started to work with offenders. And this is where I was doing risk assessment. I was sitting alongside polygraphs. I was working with sex offenders, sexually violent predators. I was also working with folks who were like mentally disordered offenders, not guilty by reason of insanity. And the reason why I say both is because these are two very different populations. One still has empathy and remorse and were just incredibly mentally ill. And when they figured out what they did on medication, they're not these horrific people. Then there's this whole other side where we're seeing the psychopathy, the sociopaths, the narcissistic personalities, and how savvy they are. And most of my work with them was working around the manipulation and helping them find a reason to not reoffend because they clearly had no empathy or remorse, right? So it's really, really interesting work. And when I came out of that, I coupled and sort of married the clinical and forensic work, but by no accident. I was actually in my own narcissistic relationship with someone almost 10 years ago now. And interestingly enough, here I was, someone who was sitting with perpetrators, sitting with sociopaths, sitting with narcissistic personalities. And I always tell clients, like, if this could happen to me, and here I was doing the work, it can literally happen to anyone. And it was with a woman. We usually see, we usually look at this through the framework of male perpetrator, female survivor. So through that, I started to like figure out like what the hell happened to me. And I started to research and study and I started to present on it. And that's when I was connected with Dr. Romani, who's now a great colleague of mine, how I met you, Dr. Christine Cochiola. And we all find each other. And through that, I was pulled into the family court system and ended up as an expert witness, consultant, and psychotherapist. And I also now teach in my old program at USC in the old marriage and family, or my old program. I teach back at the marriage and family therapy program with the desire to put clinicians out into the world that get this stuff. I was part time for a while and then decided to downsize my practice to do more academia because I was like, I'm reading these evaluations that are being written. I'm talking to evaluators who have no clue. And I feel responsible to put clinicians out there that get this stuff so we don't end up with survivors in our office who say, I've seen 5 therapists before I found you, and you finally get it. Like, survivors deserve so much more. So that's kind of like my long winded yet short version of my story.
Yeah, I think a lot of us in this space have somewhat of a similar story in that we went through it as a therapist. And that's wild. And so when I talk to others about that, what that feels like for me, most I think like I would have shame around it. I don't have any shame. I don't know why. I was enraged. I was absolutely furious that like you would, try to con me. I wasn't embarrassed because I think people think I'm supposed to be, you were a therapist. How did you miss this kind of a
Right.
thing? And to your point, like I didn't know. Nobody taught me. And I went to USC, by the way, fight on. And I had no idea what this was until I figured it out on TikTok. That's how I learned about narcissistic abuse. I
That
kid you
crazy.
not. I went in
Coaches,
there
all these people before therapists.
and
Yeah.
I have a $100,000 student loan from USC to this very
Oh,
moment.
it's real. I get that.
Yeah,
I know
it's
that.
an expensive school, and I had an amazing experience, and so many of my cohorts and I are still in contact, and they are doing brilliant work, who's getting their PhD, who's opening their practice, and they cheer me on, go Vanessa, go. But yeah, it was wild to, think that the things, especially as you're mentioning, being in a same-sex relationship because you're maybe not on alert for this person to be a predator or somebody who is going to be highly manipulative. And then here you are experiencing that. So I see that happen a lot. I think there are a lot of therapists that get victimized. I think it's also because they're going to be, forgiving or they're going to be able to rehabilitate you. So the narcissist comes in and is like, "Oh, okay, this is going to be maybe a target for me."
Totally. And I also like to go back to your point around not feeling shame. I felt the rage too. I think there's just an easier emotion for me is to just be like, what the hell is this? Right. And I remember going into like this solution focus mode. I think the only thing that really hurt was the feeling of betrayal, that this person could betray that. I was mostly upset about feeling that betrayal, but again, not embarrassed, more like angry and rageful. And I think if we can help survivors find that, then they can move towards the healing instead of sitting. And I also think there's a difference between maybe someone like, and I don't know your whole story, but I know for me, this was the first time, like, I didn't grow up with a lot of narcissism unless we're looking at like, old white men that just like naturally have some of that going on, like my father. But I didn't really grow up with these types of relationships. So I think when we go into these relationships and we've never experienced that, we don't have the complex post-traumatic stress from years of relational trauma, which some of our folks do. For me, it was like, why would I assume that someone was trying to pull the wool or create a whole other life over here or home wreck or whatever? Like my mind didn't go there because I wouldn't assume that somebody would until I started to catch on and going, wow, like this is gaslighting. This is so for me, it was a very interesting thing. And that's where I felt more of the anger than the shame because I'm like, I don't, what the hell is this? Why would someone be this sick? Right. I think we all like start off, and then it happens to us in some way, shape, or form. And then we end up working with people and realizing how rampant it actually is.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I mean, I didn't have that either in my childhood. I didn't have a ton going on. There weren't a lot of people around to sort of manage, but I think moreover, it comes in such different shapes and sizes so that you can't say like people come into my practice and they'll say, I started dating this guy, he's nothing like blank. And I go, well, just because you can't sort of gauge against the one narcissist you had because, here comes the covert, swoops in and is really, really kind and different. But, whoopsies, this person potentially could waste 20, 30 years of your fucking life, which is, I think, is far worse than the overt who you can see coming a mile
Oh, sure.
away, which is what I experienced, which was a blessing because he was so malignant and so obvious that I was able to get out quickly.
Yes.
I sort of was like, something's very, very wrong. But the covert is still this haunting. I mean, this is what keeps me up at night, quite honestly, is like this version of somebody who is like this kind, philanthropic, really soft spoken person that just wastes 20 years of your life. This is where I really think the rubber hits the road. Like, how do you find that character? Because they are so different.
I tell my students all the time, and we're like, you know this about USC, like we're really heavy in social justice. So they're always like really surprised when I say this, but I always say you find the most sociopaths in philanthropy.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is they're looking for empathic people that they can drain, right? And exploit. And what we know about predators, whether they're overt or covert, is that they look for vulnerabilities. And what I find is the covert are absolutely dangerous. The more you can identify, like the more I've worked with people who have been, because mine was much more overt too, like, it's your world, we're just living in it kind of thing was who I was with. Sorry, you might have to edit that.
What happened? I didn't even hear it. You're
Oh my
fine.
god, you didn't hear that? Okay,
No,
good.
you're
So so with the covert, it's dangerous because especially if we're looking at this through like a heteronormative lens, so like a man woman, women are drawn to sensitive, not all, I don't want to generalize, but it is refreshing even as a queer woman to be like, okay, I'm talking to a man that feels somewhat evolved and maybe leans left and isn't super reactive and maybe even appears to be a feminist. So we have to look for the clues with people like this because I think even beneath the surface of like whatever their persona is, the overt and covert still share very similar things, which is they push boundaries. They may just push them differently. Where someone like who's grandiose or overt might flat out say like, I don't want you to spend time with your friends this weekend. I want you to be with me. A covert may push it by going, I know you haven't seen your best friend in a while, but like I'm really going to miss you this weekend and I feel like you owe me that time. I really want to show you something special. Like they still don't take no for an answer. They just present it differently. And I think that sometimes we don't teach people to trust our gut when someone's being nice or charming. We're like, "Oh, I don't want to be rude." And Gavin de Becker, if anyone doesn't know who he is, he's like the number one threat assessment officer in the world. He's amazing. And he grew up with a mother who was almost killed by her partner. And he saw this happen. And from the time he was very young, he was being interviewed by law enforcement, FBI, and he went into this field and became a threat assessment officer, mostly to protect women in these positions. And he has a wonderful book called The Gift of Fear. And what it does is it teaches women or any vulnerable, person or marginalized person to stop asking for permission and stop apologizing. And if learning to pay attention, if you feel unsafe, even if the person is coming off nice and you want to say no, say no. And there's a part in the book where he's like, if a guy wants to carry groceries to your car and you're like, this is kind of weird, but society tells me maybe I should let him. And you say no to him and he calls you a bitch. He's like, be a bitch, be the biggest bitch because anybody who's healthy is going to respect that and go, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to get in your way. So don't allow charm or niceties to supersede like your feeling of safety. And I think the covert is really good at like infringing upon those boundaries in a way where women have been taught to go, oh, I feel guilty if I say no.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people come to me specifically in my practice is because I am a complete badass. And I think they want to feel empowered. And that's what I do. And that's why I talk about anger quite a bit. And to your point, you don't want to stay there. Any clinician who's studied like dialectical behavioral therapy understands that you can do the opposite action, you can do the thing and kind of then unhand it, right? So if you're wanting to, get away from some of these behaviors, you can do the opposite. For me, what I try to tell my clients is to get into practicing anger. And I'm going to tell you why, because if you come to me and you're super codependent, and I ask you to tell me what you love about yourself, and you're confused because you were groomed in a religious environment growing up or a familial system that's, very narcissistic, you don't even have a sense of self. So, this idea of becoming empowered, sometimes you need to teach people how to even get angry. Some of them are like, well, so all of this empowerment stuff then kind of levels up to like, yes, be a bitch. So now you're going to enter the dating world again and you're going to say no. You're going to do the thing. You're going to be radically autonomous. And if people don't like it, it is a gift when they walk away from your life. Because to your point, if they are going to be a good fit for you, whether it's a friendship or otherwise, you need to have those boundaries. And, that's so important. But so many people don't even do this kind of work. They don't really understand. They're just sort of on autopilot. And I think it is such a gift that you're giving to your clients, and so many of us in this space are doing because, yeah, you want to kind of teach people how to quote unquote be a bitch or be strong or be empowered or be autonomous.
For sure, and I love all that. I have similar conversations with clients of mine where I ask them, "What's their relationship with anger?" And some of them have been taught from an early age that anger resulted in, like, resistance from the primary caregiver, or, like, especially if they're female clients, which most of mine are, it's this, I was basically disciplined if I showed any kind of anger, or I was threatened with, like, being checked into, like, a hospital or something like that. So they've compartmentalized that anger, and we know as clinicians what happens with that is when we internalize it, it turns to depression and it turns to all these other things. And there's a going back to this point that you said of, like, yeah, we don't necessarily want to sit in the anger. Let's, like, move through it. Let's use it productively. And I also think there's a difference between anger and holding on to grievances and righteous anger. And I think, like, even what we're seeing now, with people who are really suffering, many of us suffering through this administration right now, is we're finding people who are utilizing what's called righteous anger, which is, if we don't get mad, then we get silent and we turn into that learned helplessness and we become paralyzed. So this is where anger in any, because I think of what's going on in the country is just a grand stage for coercive control.
Yeah.
And so they wanna wear us down and wear us out. So if we forget about that righteous anger because we have these messages of, like, "Oh, let's be the bigger person," we know that gets us nowhere with an abusive personality. We're doing a disservice to our clients if we're, like, not helping them find their voice and their anger, their righteous anger in what
Yeah,
happened.
I think a lot of people, when I first started, well, I've been screaming about this for a long time. Oh, nothing's gonna happen, Vanessa. Roe v. Wade's not going anywhere. Calm down, little lady, pat me on the head.
Don't get so hysterical.
Yeah. I was fortunately raised by a raging hippie. My mother actually has blue hair, you know what I mean? Like this kind of thing. And she's been screaming about this, since Vietnam and all of that. But it is very, very frustrating. But the fortunate thing, two things for me specifically, is that I'm actually a social worker. So I took an oath to, protect the disenfranchised. And so when people come onto my Instagram and they're like, stay out of politics, I'm like, like, you have no idea who you're talking to. Like, this is what I was built for. I mean, I became a therapist because I had to get a job. I mean, I went to USC and I studied community organizing and social policy. I wasn't going to be a therapist. I love being a therapist,
Mm,
but I had to get a real job, and that was to become a therapist so I could actually pay my bills. And then I fell in
sure.
love with it. But
Yeah.
I never was supposed to be this. I was supposed to be that person. So for me, I don't even know how to turn that off. It is totally in my fibers, cellularly. This is who Vanessa is. I was built for this. Like, when I did my run across New York, it was only to just make noise. That's what I've always wanted to do, is make noise about certain things. And being an able-bodied white woman, I have a good amount of privilege, so I feel it's my obligation to do that. But yeah, to your point, let's pivot into the world. What's happening? How are you feeling?
Well, I just a couple of things that will bring us into this conversation that I just want to go back to that you said that I think is so important. One, I can relate to you. My mother was Puerto Rican, so I grew up with just fire and rage, and she was a hardcore left. I mean, imagine what he's doing in Puerto Rico right now. My family's like on fire, and I'm actually
Yeah,
going to be there this month, so I'm super excited because
I
I
love
love
Puerto
being
Rico.
there.
It's one of my favorite
Oh,
places.
it's just so great, and so I was also raised that way from my mother, and I think that helps us as women when we're given that permission early on. But and then secondly, kind of bringing us into this conversation about politics, and I share this with my students too. We the general psychological principles that we are taught in school, when we are working with healthy-ish situations or people are just fine. But when we have outliers like what's going on in the world right now, to say that politics doesn't play a role in our work is to be incredibly tone deaf to how social stressors affect mental health. I'm gonna be blatant, that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard, and it's
Mhm.
offensive to me to say politics has no place in the office. That is a very privileged place to be because most people, if you even look at suicide, suicide is a systemic problem. It's not a personal problem. It starts from a lack of resources, a lack of safety, learned helplessness. And I think that it is our responsibility. And I think social workers have done historically a better job than MFTs and psychologists, although MFTs are very system focused. We're getting to a place where my students and I talk at length about this is relevant. And if we ignore it, when we think about above all else, do no harm, we become that encapsulated therapist who's like, well, we don't want to talk about someone who's not in the room. Why the hell not?
Mhm.
That's where most of the person and what they're going through and where their distress is coming from is not coming from this. It's coming from the larger structure. So it's incredibly relevant, which is
Yeah.
why I think we're moving into this conversation about what the hell is going on in this country
Yeah, and I
today.
think systemically we have been groomed to do this like cliche thing of like don't talk politics or religion, which are the things that are supposed to keep you from talking about real issues, right? Like that's it feels almost like I'm being gaslit in that moment, quite honestly. It's
Totally.
like, wait a minute. That is completely designed to keep people quiet about the things that are going to help them
Thank
get
you.
out of. Yep.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, for me, I'm so glad, that people are starting to talk about this in ways that are helpful. And to your point, every single one of my clients can come into my session and they're saying basically to me, like, this administration is gaslighting me. This administration is practicing Darvo. This administration is abusive. These people are lying. They are manipulative. They are exploiting others. They are gathering collateral like a cult. I mean, that's basically what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, was just gleaning this information so that he could run things for whomever. We're still going to find out if it's, Netanyahu or whoever is sort of like the puppeteering all the things. It's hard to say because it's like that Spider-Man meme. They're all pointing fingers like this at each other. Um, but ultimately, it is cultic and it is systemic, and you can't unsee it. You can't get away from it. You can't be neutral on a moving train. Everything's going to find you, everything's going to impact you in all the ways. But the Epstein files are really, really interesting too, I think, because it's not just that it's a MAGA issue, it feels now very much like a global issue around abuse of the vulnerable, which is a good thing in some ways because it's like, okay, Vanessa, enough with the MAGA shit. I'm like, you know what? If Clinton's involved in this, get him
Hallway.
to, yeah.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on, the Epstein of it all? I mean, it's so upsetting, so disturbing.
It's really, I never thought that I could sit and be blown away by depravity because of my background in working with sex offenders, knowing what exists. I've a lot of my pre and postdoc work was evaluating sexually violent predators, incest perpetrators, all the things that we're seeing right now. I've read things in police reports, in homicide reports that I don't even want to repeat, that people don't even need to know. Although, like with the Epstein files, people are starting to get exposed to the truth of it all. So I never thought in a million years like that I would be surprised by something. But I think where I am in all of this is that the level to which it extends, the orbit, the universe of this Epstein thing is it's so massive that it tells me that my greatest fear, which was when I was working with these individuals of like, oh, I'm super sensitive to like my friends posting pictures of their kids in bathing suits and things like that. I always thought maybe I was being a little like too much of like, slow down, not everybody's a sex offender. But watching this unfold, I'm like, everybody's a sex offender. Every company is
Right.
talking this, and the more that I do work in the family court system, the amount of men who are accused of either molesting or being inappropriate with their kids, or even just modeling things that show, inappropriateness around healthy sexual development. It's way more common than people think. And I'm not trying to fearmonger or create any more distress, but I am trying to validate people who are like, why does it feel like it's everywhere? Because it is. Because it is. And when I would work with these guys and, people, how would you work with them? I said, because the client itself wasn't my client. The community was the client. I was helping them stay safe so they didn't harm anybody else, whether that be an animal, a child, or a woman, or a vulnerable person. And I look at all of this and I go, this is really, my work with them would be to just find a reason for their own ego to not reoffend. Because if we're talking about the unempathic, unremorseful, narcissistic, antisocial personality, they really don't give a shit. This is property. This is a game. This is objectifying. So as far as like getting anybody to be accountable and show up, and this just, we have to beat them at this game. We have relied too much on people really need to come forward, or we need to, do X, Y, and Z. These folks are going to run, hide, avoid, pay people off. And I'll be surprised, honestly, Vanessa, if we even see consequence from any of this, which is really what makes me sick, is will anyone
Yeah,
actually be, punished for this?
it's so true. And I think it's about power, it's about control. And what you see happen that keeps them in those positions is not just the collateral that's being gathered, but also the flying monkeys, the enablers, the people who are like power adjacent, who are like, put me in, coach, these sort of disenfranchised millionaires that are just wanting to be next to it or with it or involved in it. So maybe they're not the perpetrators per se, but they are propping them up. They're going to just zip their mouth. They're not going to say anything. It's just like we see with every single cultic scenario
Aiding and
is all
abetting.
of, yeah, and they're
Mhm.
all enabling this. I mean, we're seeing it with the DOJ. So that's what's also really scary. It's that the cult is not just the cult leader or leaders. It's that all of these people that are turning a blind eye, that are not speaking out, that are protecting these dangerous people. So it becomes very systemic, and it is enormous, to your point. I think ultimately we will potentially stop the bleeding if we can have any victory in, the midterms, just to sort of like, and by stop the bleeding I mean we're still putting a band-aid on it, like a, severed leg, but it's
Mhm.
somehow to sort of turn the ship around. Because what has to happen, and sometimes they, and mostly they do get too big for their britches, just like with John Gotti, he was too flashy and the kind of this kind of stuff. So it's possible that some justice would show up when they become disempowered. Like with Diddy, there was at least a like a bump in the road for him when he became disempowered. So he has to become, Trump specifically, stateside has to become disempowered even slightly for us to see people start to speak out or move away from enabling, this kind of stuff. Some kind of a fracture, but it's so scary. And it could go any different way because every single day he's just throwing out all kinds of distractions. Like, and he
Actions.
will, because he knows he's lame duck, he will, you know, like sink the whole ship without it. Like it's like
Oh,
every single perpetrator, they will bankrupt an entire business, a multi-million dollar corporation, rather than pay 1 cent in child support. So they will cut their arms off with a rusty spoon before they pay 1 cent in child support. And that's what he's going to do. Before he actually can be held accountable, he will sink the whole ship.
he will. And he'll, I think what has been so disheartening about this too is we're also seeing where the values and the priorities lie in our country. I can't speak for the world. I mean, in some other areas of the world, they've at least called people out, they've removed titles, they've, shunned them from society. I have never felt so disgusted to be part of this and I've never been an anti-American, fuck this place, I'm gonna move to France. Like that's never been me. I've always loved living here and been proud of living here. So this is not like a trend for me. It actually, I hate this feeling of being somewhat embarrassed to be part of a country that does not prioritize vulnerable populations, that exploits, we still have this, like, I don't know, this rhetoric where the most dangerous people are the most vulnerable people, the trans folks, the people of color. We're not protecting children, although this is supposed to be, the party of family values and all of these things. So it's like they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. They're gaslighting the whole country. They're using threat, fear, and intimidation to keep people in line, to basically say, listen, if you protest, you've now seen what happens if you protest. We will kill you and we will not investigate that. I mean, this is coercive control. When Albert Biderman created the Biderman Chart of Coercion, it was literally made for prisoners of war. You and I see it in the intimate partner relationships that we treat, but we're now seeing this the way in which Biderman actually intended it to be. And I think it was the Korean War. We're seeing that now systemically through the country as people are learning to get quiet. They're not wanting to go out, they're staying home, they're not protesting as much, which I understand is terrifying, but they're getting what they want. And I don't know, I think it was AOC the other day said, impeach him, get rid of him, maybe he dies, it doesn't matter. He has built an infrastructure that even in the absence of him, they're going to try to rise up, which is why, like, at some point something needs to happen where the left stops playing by the rules or stops looking at the guidebook going, well, that's not in the rule book. We're not playing by that anymore. And you and I know by working with survivors of this is that the second you play by the rules, you've lost, which a lot of my work as a consultant with private attorneys is to help them flip the script. Stop going in on the defense. You're going to lose. Stop defending your client. You need to go in on offense, which now they're starting to talk about. But if we don't go in on offense, we've lost. We're done.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I always think of it on a micro scale too. It's like he has to, like, if you go to warn, let's say, the new supply of a victim, right? So in my case, if I were to warn the new wife of my abuser, you know, watch out, he's going to do something to you. She's not going to listen, right? This is very standard. Or
Mhm.
not always, but sometimes, they don't listen. And what ends up happening is the abuser pushes her down the stairs, ultimately does the thing, right? Does the awful thing that happens in some way, shape, or form. And I feel like Trump in some ways has to proverbially push America down the stairs. He has to punch her and give her a black eye and stun her into the understanding of who he really is. So MAGA ultimately, if we're going to just follow this on a micro, scale to a macro scale, and we draw that parallel, it feels like he's sort of trending in that direction where he's going to do the thing, and blow it up. And then ultimately it's going to be, well, I tried to warn you. We tried to tell you, America, that this is what you were dealing with and you didn't want to listen. Unfortunately, for me, nobody at the age of 52 was looking for my uterus. I have an able bodied white boy for a son. It's not necessarily going to impact me the way that it's going to impact people of color and the disenfranchised LGBTQ community. But as white women, I feel like we have to make a lot of noise so that, those people are represented because there is some privilege there. And
Really.
people of color have been screaming about this for too long. They need to just take a seat and relax and obviously vote. But I think white women really need to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting right now. Are you seeing that?
It's funny because there's such a split. I think white women, we have, it's so, I have such a reaction to white women who are still like kind of clutching their pearls and not really knowing what to do. And it's just like you have so much privilege as a white, even as a queer white woman, I have more privilege than many other communities, right? And it's like when I see white women move towards like that trad side of just, they go from daddy to husband, so to speak, and have never really been given a thought of their own and just follow their husband's politics. And then they end up like Megyn Kelly. Like that is like, I'm more upset with those women than I probably am
Sure.
with like straight white men, to be honest,
Yep.
because I'm
Agreed.
like,
Agreed.
at what point did you just you either never built a sense of self or you've just been provided for so much that you cannot see what's happening and all the women that who came before you to give you this privilege to have a voice. Like when you think about women's suffrage and all of this stuff, I'm like, they've just there's so much internalized misogyny that I actually have more of a reaction to those folks. I also have a huge reaction to a lot of the right who are now going, yeah, you know what? Kamala was a better choice. I'm like, you, okay? Because we warned you, but you trusted this guy because you had higher standards for Harris. You just believed what was coming out of his mouth. Why would you ever believe someone who's a pathological liar? And now I'm hearing all these guys from the manosphere and all of them going, yeah, Harris would have been a better choice. And that to me, like you'd think that would be, oh, that's good news. I want to put my fist through my phone when I
Yeah.
hear that because I'm like,
It
why did you ever think this was a good choice?
Right. She was wildly overqualified.
It
I
was.
mean, she held a position in each of the branches. I mean, she was beyond qualified. I don't know that there's ever been a candidate who's been more qualified,
She had to
period.
prove herself more, and she was
I
so
know.
tied to Biden. So, I mean, there's so much there we could do a whole hour on, like, what
Yeah,
happened there. I think where I and it I'm gonna be incredibly transparent right now, so I hope that's okay. I
sure.
think the last couple of days, what has frustrated me, and I actually did a post on my personal page about this, is the people who decided to not vote, and maybe some people are listening right now who didn't. I have an issue with people who said, I just don't know what her stance is on Gaza." And that they were paying more attention to her and what she was or wasn't going to do, which equates with Trump will just naturally do a better job, or we don't hold him to the same standard. So he's going to fuck up either way. But what is she going to do? And by not voting, that's really how we lost because he didn't really win by that much more. It's just a lot of people ended up not voting because they didn't really know what her policies were. And I think that that's sometimes where we can go, okay, you didn't vote based on emotion. Like you need to kind of get out of that and think strategy. It's no different than if somebody says, "Well, I don't want an attorney who's a narcissist." Why? Use him. He's going to go in there and
Oh,
fight for
they
you,
are
right?
the
You
best.
might sometimes have to use things to the benefit, play the game, play the chess game.
Yeah.
Harris wasn't perfect, but she was definitely the better option. And people were just like, I'm just not going to vote.
Yeah. I think a Fern was the better option, but yes, she was certainly overqualified. So I want to know, I have a couple more questions while I still have you because we're gonna stop soon. And but I wanted to ask you just to kind of leave it on a positive to the best of our abilities. Because you mentioned something that's really compelling, which is that some people are sort of seeing it. What do you see as being the thing that makes people glitch out from this cultic scenario? What kind of things are going to potentially get people to wake up from being in this cult?
It, it's hard to directly answer that because people leave at different times. It takes different things. But I will say, like, naturally, if this is someone who leans more right and maybe sees empathy as a weakness and cannot sort of look on the other side of the aisle and think how someone else might be feeling, it's not going to be something like, oh, I see how these people are being affected and I can't tolerate that anymore. With the exception of children, I have seen the Epstein thing sort of split the right,
Yeah.
which is good. But I always think it takes it finally affecting them in some way. And, I was having this conversation with my wife yesterday. I'm like, I think it's so interesting that it's Trump bombing Iran that now people are done. And I think it's because this is now going to affect pocketbooks. The he just everything is going to get more expensive, gas is going up, food like groceries are not going down. I think once it starts to personally affect and the other thing I would say is let's just say for the sake of many of these people on the right have narcissistic traits. In order to align with this, you have to, okay? They are now feeling humiliated because what they voted for, they're now realizing they were wrong and they can't be wrong. So they now feel that the person they trusted has humiliated them. And we know from working with survivors when they've humiliated their narcissist, what happens? There's rage, there's attack, there's like all this sort of like stuff that starts to happen. And what I'm noticing is when I watch a lot of like the manosphere stuff to sort of hear what they're thinking. And a lot of it is like they're so mad that they feel like they were completely lied to, and now they feel humiliated, and that's a threat to their ego. So now they're kind of rising up and making the I think it's going to take some of that, like these personal hits on their ego, their pocketbook. It's now starting to affect even privileged communities, and I think it needs to for there to be any sustainable change.
Yeah, and I think what unfortunately, I hate to say this out loud, but because we live in a patriarchal society, unfortunately, we are going to need men.
Yes.
Able-bodied white men are going to have to be leading the charge. We are not going to have any kind of revolution without them becoming wise to it. So I'm okay with them waking up. I'm here for the glitch. I want them to snap out of it and come out of the haze, narcissistically or not. I really don't give a shit.
We
There's
need the
too
help.
much at stake. Yeah, we need men to wake up. That's a really white men need to wake up
Mhm.
specifically. And then the last question, I developed this with my agent because um, we were trying to figure out kind of a fun thing to do with the podcast, but we came up with the telephone company question,
Okay.
which is I used to climb telephone poles for Verizon or 9X, that's how old I am,
Oh my gosh.
um, in White Plains, New York for 8 years when I was young and gorgeous. And it's very random and weird. People are like, what the hell? So, my question is, what about you do you think people don't know or would find really interesting or compelling, quirky, that you haven't maybe shared before, or you have that you think listeners might find interesting about you?
Well, that's a good question. Well, I'll give you like a couple of things that I just love to do, like in my so I am a huge outdoors person. I ride a motorcycle. I have a bunch of women that I ride with. It's very like it's just a very healing kind of tribal, especially living in the canyons in Los Angeles. It's my therapy. It's literally my therapy. But as far as like something that I was doing for a while, I don't do as much anymore, but I climbed for a while. So I summited Kilimanjaro in 21
Oh, wow.
and I climbed Machu Picchu in 2018. And I've always found that's kind of, I call it my church. So climbing, hiking, doing like those really big Kilimanjaro was a feat. It was one of the most emotional things. I did it during COVID. And let me tell you, it like brought me as close to whatever maker is out there. It was, if anyone has the ability or time to ever do something like that, it really is life changing. And probably one of the things I'm the most proud of, like ever doing, is 19,500 feet. Yeah,
Good for
it was.
you. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's Kilimanjaro translates to the roof of Africa. So it's literally the highest point in the continent, and it is the most beautiful thing you will ever see.
That's phenomenal. Well, I could talk to you honestly for hours, and I'm not just saying that. And I know you agree because it's just
I'm
so much.
happy to come back on at any point. I love speaking with you too. You and I we get into the grit.
We get right into it. I know it's great. And I mean, it's so wonderful to be in this group of characters, as you mentioned, with Romany and Dr. Christine and Dr. Nadine, whom I also love. She was married to the
I
Wolf
was
of
on her
Wall
show
Street.
in December. We had a good time
Yeah,
too.
love her.
Yeah.
You know what I love about her too? Because she's from New York. So
Mhm.
we have that like New York vibe thing when it kind of comes out a little more with me when I'm around her. You know what I
I
mean?
love it.
Um, but I just love chatting with you, and I think it's so stimulating for me, and I just really can't thank you. And I know that the listeners are going to love it, and I would love to have you back on for sure to shoot shit around all the things. And certainly we'll have enough to talk about because something's happening every single day.
Yeah, no, it is like we could literally do this daily with what's going on. And if there's things that your listeners like say, we want to hear more about this or have Catherine back on, like let's do it. I'm down. I mean, I love
Yeah.
this kind of stuff and I know that listener it's cathartic for people. So just let
Yeah.
me know.
Yeah. So tell me, what are you working on and where can people find you?
So they can find me at, well, if they go onto like social media, cbpsychological.com, they can find me on Instagram there. I'm actually currently writing a book right now as well. So I have a focus, a niche in law and ethics, specifically around coercive control. And right now I'm writing it's kind of a book, manuscript, whatever, on how to help clinicians work through the legal intricacies and to keep clients safe. I've had people call me for consultation recently. They have adult survivors of Epstein. I'm hearing the worst things, and they're calling me to just say, how do I keep this person safe? And so Dr. Ramani has been holding my feet to the fire. She's like, you need to get this book done. So I'm hoping to have it done by summer, at least like the rough draft of it. And it's going to be something that clinicians can pick up and go, how do I document safely? When is it okay to not use these general psychological principles and to really fight for my client while still holding on to my license? And I think it's just going to help clinicians feel a little bit more confident in doing things a little bit more unorthodox, because we learn a certain way in school. But as you and I know, with these dynamics, if we were to treat it like any other relationship, we can actually harm the client.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, that's important work.
Yeah.
And I'll be looking forward to that book. All right. Well, it's so good to be with you. Be
Good to see you,
well.
Vanessa.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today on Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser. If this episode resonated with you, or if you recognize any of these patterns in your own life or someone you care about, know that you are not alone and healing is possible. If you found value in this conversation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us reach more survivors who need to hear these messages. For exclusive bonus content, deeper discussions with Dave and me, and ways to support the show, join us on Patreon or follow along on Instagram or YouTube at Vanessa Reiser LCSW. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and walking toward the light. And remember, healing is a radical rebellion, and your peace is the revolution. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode. Music by Alex Productions, Once Upon a Time.